Thank you. Welcome here in Rome. As you see, we were able to upgrade our catacombs a little. They are more comfortable, like this venue. I just wanted to say hi, hello. I'm very happy to be able to co-sponsor, co-host this conference. We have a few people in our faculty who are very dedicated to the issues, to the problems of migration, education. You know Father René, and there are a few others. So we are really happy to have you here. I hope this will be a good time for you, even if you have to be on empty stomach. I hope this is still a good time for you, and we are in Rome, so there is no shortage of good restaurants anyway. I wish you a good continuation of your work, and looking forward to seeing you individually also. Thank you.
Chiara. But I will introduce as we go, and others who have been friends and partners for a long time in this space. So I have no doubt, and I'm looking at you, Duncan, that this is going to be an interactive and interesting, and I hope really challenging session. So just to say, there are no precious topics. There are no, sort of out of bounds issues. It's really what we would hope for is that the panelists as well as the audience are willing to engage and ask tough questions and, call foul if somebody says something that you don't quite buy or deserves more unpacking or what have you. So, this is just the way that I think is probably the best use of our time, is to be genuine and engaged and challenging of each other. So, with that said, I think I would propose that we start close to home. So the UNHCR representative for Italy is Chiara Caroletti. Okay. So Chiara is the representative for Italy, the Holy See, and San Marino. She has expertise in international law and human rights and democratization, and prior to joining UNHCR, she worked at the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which I did not know. So welcome to Chiara, and I'm gonna pose the first question, and then we'll go down the line. And the hope is that we can have relatively short interventions at the beginning in hopes of having multiple rounds and, more importantly, opportunity for questions from the floor. So Chiara, based in Italy, your office has experience welcoming refugee students through various kinds of legal pathways, but also, I think, a long and deep experience in integration and inclusion of young people who are already here. So I would just welcome you to reflect generally on the experience here and what you think is notable and worth highlighting. Great. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Manal, and great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I spent most of my days talking about the challenges for refugees in the country, and for once I'm really excited about talking about something that is going really well. And that has to do obviously with education, and it has to do with integrating refugees into the university system. And I hope I'm not looking too biased, being Italian myself, to say that this is something that Italy is doing really, really well. There are a couple of programs that have been developed over the years. The first attempt the UNHCR made a few years ago was to find ways in which to make refugees better integrated, more comfortable, and to address some of the challenges that they were facing in accessing tertiary education. And the challenges in a very bureaucratic country like Italy are numerous. And so the first sort of priority for us was to bring together universities and understand those challenges and understand what it is that was making it so difficult for refugees to get to university. And so we created what is called the Manifesto of the University of the, okay, let me say it in English better, the Manifest for Inclusive Universities. And the idea was to bring together a number of universities. Today we are at 54. That committed somehow to look into the challenges that refugees were facing and addressing everything from certificates, translation and conversion of certificates, to tuition fees, to all of these challenges that we know refugees face when they come to a country like Italy. And so this manifesto that, as I said, has now included up to 54 universities, has really, really enabled us to, first of all, understand, but then assist universities in managing those challenges and in finding ways to make sure that the pathway to university for refugees wasn't as arduous as it once was. And so there are now all these universities that are obviously better placed, with better capacities, and with definitely an incredibly strong will to sort of continue to include refugees, be these Ukrainian, be these Afghans, be these any refugees that it's currently in the country. So that's certainly, I think, an important success, particularly because in Italy, one of the biggest challenges we're facing at the moment, other than obviously arrivals that by boat that everybody hears about day in and day out, is really how to integrate refugees in the country. And so we have made that our priority in the office in Italy. And so education is certainly an important aspect of that. What the second sort of initiative that was launched a few years ago, and which started really small, was how to make sure that this wealth of knowledge and willingness and generosity that university in Italy were showing and demonstrating, and seeing how this could also benefit refugees that were sitting in refugee camps, that were not necessarily having opportunities, etc., and see how we could extend that to them, and making sure that they could arrive in Italy legally, in obviously not having to get themselves in the hands of smugglers and traffickers, and have that chance to a tertiary education. So this program, which is called the University Corridors, started off in 2019 with roughly 6 scholarships being given primarily to refugees that were living in Ethiopia, primarily Eritreans, but there were others as well. And that was recently expanded quite significantly to include also other nationalities, refugees living in West Africa, refugees living in the Middle East, etc., in the East and the Horn, really trying to look at where talent is and where students who have really deserve to sort of have an opportunity can actually have that opportunity. So that really went extraordinarily well. And so we moved from 6 scholarships in 2019 to now over, and I can't see anything, so I'm going to look at my glasses. So now we are roughly at 140 scholarships, with over 33 universities participating in this program. There, then, of course, the competition came in, and everybody else wanted to do the same. And so we had a really important university in Rome called Luis University, who sort of jumped on the wagon and decided, we also want to do this, but we want to do this our way. And so they offered quite a significant number of scholarships, over 20 scholarships, for students that were refugees in the Mediterranean. So they open out opportunities in Lebanon, in Jordan, and in other countries like that. And really enable then to some of these students to have 5 years of really high quality education in one of Italy's top universities. So that was also quite impressive. But what's even more impressive here is that it's not just the universities, which is not just because it's a really big deal, is the fact that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came along, because obviously you can't come to Italy unless you have a visa. So we really managed to bring the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on board and to make sure that they enable the legal passage into Italy. But then, of course, the other challenge is, great, you have a scholarship, you have your certificates are being accepted, etc., etc. But living in Italy still remains a pretty challenging experience when you are coming from a refugee camp in Eastern Sudan or in Ethiopia. And so what we really needed to see was how do we integrate these refugees so that their educational experience is actually a successful one. Because we, of course, know of many refugees who did come and then left because it was just impossible for them to sort of lived through that experience. And so we've had an enormous support from civil society and families who have started to come forward and making sure that they could be hosted and that they could be supported and they could learn what it is to live in this country, as beautiful as it is, but as strange as Italy can also be. So what is, I guess, really interesting and positive about this experience is that so many actors have come together to really support the students and making sure that they can be successful. The objective obviously being that they can have sort of achieved the dreams they aspire to, but also that one day, perhaps, who knows, they can also go home and be able to be part in the fabric of their countries and rebuild whenever that is possible and suitable. So that's a little bit the experience of Italy. I'm not going to go on too long, but I do believe it's a very positive one, and one that we hope that other countries will take on. I remember just before coming to Italy, I was living in Washington, working for UNHCR there, and that's something that we started to think about. How do we make this a program of this nature? And I do think that there's so much opportunities in Europe and in many other countries to sort of replicate these examples. So I'm here to encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Chiara. So I'm really grateful that you mentioned a couple of things that I think I've neglected to talk about over the past few days. And the one is the protection function of education. And we often talk about the protection function of education at primary and secondary level, even more importantly in the context of early childhood development and care. But when we talk about education actually being able to create a pathway to durable, long-term status, protection, stability, what have you, it's only, as you said, it's only available for a very, very few. But that doesn't, I think, discount or discredit the importance of providing that long-term protection through education. The other piece is the real value of having government buy-in. And that's something that I think we don't have a lot of government representation here. I'm going to move next to Christian because I think he's pretty close to his government counterparts and able to provide some perspective. Sorry, but I think Chiara pointing to the fact that the Italian government is on board and supportive, and that is ultimately the foundation for everything when we talk about access and inclusion and protection and opportunity. So finally, let me move then to Christian. And Christian, I'm not going to pronounce your name right. Hulshorte? Okay, thanks. Christian is head of the division of for the Southern Hemisphere at the German Academic Exchange Service, and the acronym is DAAD, which is what we commonly refer to them I suppose in English. So Christian, I was going to thank you for posing your own question. I'm going to ask you to please reflect on the experience in Germany of preparing the higher education environment to absorb and to hopefully, I think what ended up being a very welcoming context, but the large influx of Syrian refugees in around 2015 and beyond, but then perhaps even more valuably, how that initial exercise of preparing the ground then positioned Germany to be in a position to welcome, waves of refugees after that. Over to you.
Yeah, Manal, thank you so much for the invitation and for the chance to speak here today. Okay, after the Italian experience, perhaps I can share a little bit of the German experience with you. Usually I start quite early because until the 2000s we had a serious problem in Germany. The German international university landscape was not really international. So we had a serious problem attracting international students at all, and only in 2001 we started really introducing classes in English language, doing more about tutoring, about study advising and so on. That had nothing to do with refugee issues at the time. It was simply to become more attractive for the international student population. But in 2014, 2015, with the Syria crisis coming to a high point, really, and a large number of Syrian refugees knocking at our doors, I have to say, and I'm not working for the German government, although I'm financed by the German government, the German government acted quite quickly. And between 2014 and 2019, I just looked it up, the total investment in terms of providing money for higher education in order to become more welcoming for refugee students was just here in this program line, I'm going to explain now, 100 million euros, which was quite a lot, I have to say. 5 years, 100 million euros. What was financed? The money was given to DAD. DAD is a membership association of more or less all German universities. So our job was to pass on the money to the universities, depending on the number of refugee students they took in. Okay, and I guess at that point of time we had a certain experience, and well, it was mainly Syria at that time. Germany and Syria had been good partners in academic terms for a couple of years, so we knew a little bit about what was coming from Syria, which was definitely an advantage, I would say. So we designed tests in German language, but also subject-related tests to help students and universities to access their abilities. How well could they fit in? And if the test told us, okay, there's a certain deficit before you can start your bachelor's, before you can start your master's, we were able to finance foundation years, bridging courses, plus a very, very important element in language training. Although there are now close to 2,000 classes or master courses taught in English language, we still believe it makes a lot of sense, especially in the long-term perspective, because already in 2014 we expected the majority of people to stay for a long time. So we said, okay, take language classes, you can do it at the universities, we will finance the lecturers needed, yeah, and everything connected to it. We also provided a lot of money for student tutors, because in our understanding, students needed more support than the average international student. I think that's an experience you all can share. Yeah? And the interesting thing was, even before the government stepped in and provided this financing, there were lots of activities coming from the student side. And they did it free of charge, of course, without being paid for it. So our idea was, why don't we support this activity, give them a little bit of money, yeah, to just keep them running. And I think that was one of the best ideas we had in the end, because until today, every university I visit in Germany, I'm overwhelmed about the student activities I see in order to support students coming from Syria, but not only from Syria, from Afghanistan and now from Ukraine. So with those measures being financed by the federal government via DAAD, Germany was already quite well prepared in the higher education landscape, let's say when the Afghan crisis started to develop last year. With Afghanistan, many things were quite different compared to Syria, of course. The general level of qualification, let's be honest about it, was definitely much lower for people coming from Afghanistan. So there was even more need in order to provide language courses, bridging courses, foundation years, and so on. But the measures were in place, and the government said, okay, we have established and implemented those measures for the Syrian crisis. Now let's simply continue and make sure you get the same amount of support also for people coming from Afghanistan. And now with Ukraine, still we are quite happy to have this financial support. The universities are happy to have implemented all the support measures. Also, once again, you have to look for the differences, and there are definitely certain differences now when it's coming to Ukrainian students. They need other kind of support compared to Afghans or to Syrians. But in general, I have to say German universities are doing quite well. Because of, let's say, there was a lot of motivation and a lot of financial support. Also, I have to mention, and that's probably a difference between Germany and perhaps even the majority of the countries you are coming from, it's all government money. That's probably the German way of doing things. We always look to the government. No? And for a long time, that was, let's say, a good and easy working solution because the money was coming. No? Now, for the first time, because of the crisis, we have a little bit of a problem. There are definitely some budget cuts, and we will have to see how we can cope with it. And diversifying our funding might be a necessity for the near future. I'm not really sure yet. We are negotiating with our parliamentarians, and by the end of November we will know how much money DID is going to get in the end. Yeah. Last word I wanted to make, it's not only really about supporting refugee students. Of course, it's the main goal, but there's a very important lesson we learned. By taking in large numbers of refugees and providing a favorable context for them, we could really internationalize and diversify at home. And that was not easy for German universities, but we just did an evaluation about a year ago, and the outcome was highly interesting because the majority of German students said by having those large numbers of international students, refugee students coming to Germany, they also think the educational environment nowadays is a better one than it used to be. Yeah? There's so much to learn from this, and I think it was important for us also to recognize this. And finally, Germany is definitely also more welcoming today for international students in general. Yeah? And here I'm not talking about refugee students, I'm talking about self-paying students coming from the United States, from Canada or whatever, because the German system of higher education, I don't know if, well, some of you have probably made experiences here, was a little bit survival of the fittest, I always call it. Yeah? So you come to Germany, you get a chance to study, and in general we believe there's good quality of teaching and research, yeah? But it's up to you what you make of it. You don't pay tuition fees, which is nice. The government is kind enough to pay the tuition fees, but your success depends on you. And if you struggle, usually there's not much support you're getting. And for international students coming from a different system, Anglo-American system or whatever, that was always a difficulty. And now with the support measures being implemented, I think the general landscape is much more welcoming to international students, which is a very positive outcome for us as well. I stop here, Manal, and of course I'm open to questions later on. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. I think there was so much interesting in what you said, but perhaps the last piece really struck me in that, when we talk about refugee higher education, so often we're trying to steer away from these presumptions that so much extra has to be in place in order to allow refugee students to participate, when really they just need, somebody said earlier today, they just need the door to be open, that's all. They're ready to go. They're ready to participate, to include, to bring benefits in the host community, to the campus, what have you. And so I think it's so interesting that by creating a more inclusive environment, everyone benefited, and more importantly, you have the data or the evidence to show that that is indeed the case. So thanks for bringing that up, Christian. I want to move now to Alcatan. Originally from Iraq, she recently completed her degree studying on a Dafi scholarship. And I think we want to focus here on some of the things Christian was saying about the student experience and the involvement of students in creating some of those early initiatives to bring refugee students on campus to providing integration and inclusion support, etc. So Alcatan, I know you've been active in your community and engaged with advocacy with the Ministry of Youth and Sport, as I understand it. So if you could talk a little bit about some of that work, about the role of being in university and on campus in your own personal development, and also how you understand the role of students in interacting with policy and sort of high-level discussions. Okay. Please, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So hello everyone, I'm Dan Alcatan. As it said, I'm from Iraq but currently live in Morocco. It's an honor for me to be here today with you all. So let me just start by explaining a bit the educational system in Morocco for refugees. So the access for like primary or secondary school in Morocco has been now much more easier than it has been before with the work done by the UNHCR. It needs only like a qualified note so you can pass the primary or secondary school with only the UNHCR documents. But for tertiary education, there is like 3 situations. Either you have a Moroccan baccalaureate or high school diplomas, as my case, and you can join the university exactly as Moroccans. Either ways, there is the AMIP, which is kind of a cooperation with some countries like Yemen, for example, and also they can join the university easily. If none of these cases are available, normally it's very complicated to join university, but hopefully since last year, 2021, the UNHCR has made a deal or an agreement with the Ministry of Education in Morocco and the benefit of these students. Now, as a DAFI graduate from medical school, I can confess that it has helped me a lot in a financial way in my studies. Beside my parents and family support, they were always there for me, supporting and believing in me. But let me just say that DAFI, the program DAFI, is not like only the financial aid, but it's like a full package. We used to have different conferences, teamwork to raise our, for example, soft skills. And also we organize many activities, like for example on the Refugee Day, we used to have to make like conferences and open doors to hear from other refugees, their problems, obstacles, so we can maybe find them solutions in a group way. Also, we made a bunch of videos a while back in COVID, awareness campaigns for the importance of education with family and parents of refugees. Also, me as being a member of the association Vivre Ensemble, which means living together, which is an NGO in Morocco who included the members, Moroccan members and refugees, and the aim of living together in peace in a collaborative way with the Ministry of Youth and Sport. We used to go like in summer camps for students, primary students and children, to make them understand what is being a refugee and what are the difference between being a refugee, immigrants, what are the conditions they go through, the circumstances that made them leave their country, and believe me, much more activities that I can't say everything. Now, about the university, I can say that the university has helped me a lot to build who I am today in a professionally and personally way. A self-confident doctor refugee, it's made me achieve the principal goal of my life, which is being exactly a doctor. And I can also confess that I was treated in the university exactly as Moroccans, whether by my professors or even by my colleagues. Like I had training all over the years without any obstacle, met a lot of people from all over the world, immigrants, other migrants, and refugees, and most importantly, having a job. And now I'm a general doctor in Morocco in a private hospital. So, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So, since I'm freshly graduated, like just back in March, I'm thinking of continuing my studies, and why not being a specialist doctor, maybe one day attending the UNHCR or the World Health Organization to just show people that a refugee can be something one day, and your donations are not a waste. No, it's not at all. And yeah, I'd finally like to say that I'll be very happy if we can increase the number of the students who can attend DAFI in a way or another, and if we can give more attention about the tertiary studies and education with all its training, soft skills, and whatever that looks maybe important or interesting. And thank you so much for your time.
Bravo. Thanks so much, and congratulations. It's great news. So now that we have, jumped sort of from a host or receiving country context to a hosting context, I would start by reflecting that the conditions that Alcatan was mentioning about Morocco being an inclusive higher education environment, this is where the vast majority of our work, and I think many of us together, is focused, is on conditions in the countries that are hosting large numbers of refugees. So of course there are places like Italy, like Germany, where hundreds of thousands of people do flee and are being integrated, but the vast majority of refugees stay where they are, right, in the first country of asylum. And so most of our work is in supporting those governments, those higher education institutions, those students to strengthen, to make those environments more robust and able to absorb and expand opportunities there. So that said, I'm going to jump to you, Alan. Alan McKay is Deputy Vice Principal International and Director of Edinburgh Global at the University of Edinburgh in the UK. And Alan, if I could ask you, I know your university has a foot in each side, right? You've got a lot of internationalization and refugee inclusive programs on campus, but you also do lots of work with institutions in other places, presumably in hosting areas. So I give you the choice. Reflect on either one of those or both. Over to you.
Thanks, Manal, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm a bit aware that I'm probably at the halfway point now in terms of this conference, and sort of people are probably feeling powered down a bit, but I thought that was fantastic from the last speaker there in terms of the hope and the optimism in terms of countries that also recognise that I think people are people. And are not labelling people in different ways in terms of, despite the complexities and the challenges there, but actually see people as people. That largely has been the case in terms of the domestic. If I look at this through a domestic lens in Scotland and then think about this globally, I'm very fortunate to live and work in a country and also a university that approaches this in terms of refugees, in particular as Scots. So we have a Scottish government that has a new Scot strategy, so people that move or are relocated to Scotland are just treated as I would be in every way in terms of access to everything, which is fantastic. So that really helps in terms of making people feel welcome and included. So there's a specific focus on that by the Scottish government. Obviously, there are some matters that aren't within the realms of the Scottish Government, including things like defence, and another one is immigration. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of advocacy, and I think we all do that across the different countries that we work in. I work within a university, so the University of Edinburgh. Where have we put some of that effort? So I'm not in it. There's lots that we do in terms of supporting students from a whole range of different countries in terms of access to the university. We have things across English language, so we have 90 free places every single day available not just to students but to families and to children to be able to help them settle in the city. So it's not just about what's good for the university, it's what's good for the societies and the communities in which we serve, because that's what a university is there to do, certainly why we were established. Some of my effort as well, if you let me do this, has gone into supporting forcibly displaced academics and their families, and being able to support them to relocate within the university. So yes, there is a big student focus across this conference, but again, as I say, some of that has been supported because of the conditions within which we've operated. But it has meant that I've focused as well on increasing the support available to allow people to continue academic careers and to continue their careers and provide temporary sanctuary. Nothing new. We've been doing this for a very long time. Some of those, you never know the trajectory, because one of the academics that we supported in the 1930s went on to win the Nobel Prize. Not everyone will win a Nobel Prize, but you're dealing with extremely talented individuals. And it's important to speak up and advocate for that in lots of different ways. But I think now have one of the largest programs in terms of academics at risk. We work with Scholars at Risk, the Council for Academics at Risk in the UK, and thinking about the learning across that, in terms of both the student side, but also in terms of academic pathways as well. The other area is the work that I've done with others in terms of supporting students, and I use the word students, and again, we're back to people are people seeking asylum in a country where sometimes that can be very disenfranchising. If you're talking about, as many UK universities do, about widening access and participation, this is probably one of the most disenfranchised groups anywhere in the UK. So there's a lot of work there to do things like, and this is what I talk to others in the UK about, which is, and you all know that, which is you can do this. Don't lose hope. but call it out, stand up, because there's a lot of people sitting down, not just here, but you've got to be courageous in some of this and say that you can do this. So we touched on this morning in terms of these things can involve cost and complexity. But don't give up. So some of that is within, my gift and working with others. A lot of the work that I do is trying to do things through influencing others, because I work within a federated university that's very, very large. So it's not all about what I say or whatever. Nothing gets done unless you can work productively with others. So what we did is said, if you're a student seeking asylum, applying to our university, you're Scottish. You might not be in terms of the way that the government interprets this, but if you've got the ability and you can come here, we will treat you as if you're applying and coming from Scotland. And in addition to that, we'll provide financial support to be able to help you into the university. So there's a bit there about, I suppose, there's 3 C's, which is being a catalyst for some of this, and sometimes, and I'm not trying to be in any way sort of, it's the University of Edinburgh, it does quite well on things like rankings. Who care? Big deal. but I'm aware in the position that I'm in, acutely aware that there's a sense of duty there in terms of the importance of this. But I can be a catalyst for others that might look, if the University of Edinburgh is doing this, then maybe we should do this as well because they're doing it. So we use that as well as a way of saying, why aren't you thinking about this? You can do it if you want. Yes, there's money involved, but if you want to forego that income to support scholarships and allow people, you can do that. And we go back to things like the government this and the government that. Yeah, governments come and go, but places like churches, for example, or religious establishments in different countries, and universities, colleges have outlasted most governments, and the governments are aware of that as well. So don't let that be a barrier. A lot of it is about connecting people and creating those opportunities. And around some of this, going back to that point about influencing through others and the importance of that, I meet with a lot of people, and they will say, costs, and it's very complex. And it's like, well, actually, what I'm trying to do is to map out that in your plan is sustainable development goals. They're very, very important. They're on every shiny plan that most universities produce. Things like widening participation and access, very, very important, and community engagement. And it's like, so I'm not asking you to take on additional work. I'm not asking you to spend extra money. I'm asking you to prioritize this in terms of refugee, migrant access to higher education and for academic staff as part of your job, because you're saying it in the plan. So it's not asking for more and more, it's just doing more of what you should be doing anyway. And I think through it all is trying to create a coalition of the willing, I suppose, both within my institution, both within the UK. We're a University of Sanctuary, we work with Council for At-Risk Academics, we're part of the Connected Learning and Crisis Consortium. We're a global university, like many universities, they're global in nature, or claim to be. With being a global university comes global responsibility. So some of this has worked very, very well, but there's lots of things on the global side of things where universities are opening campuses in different parts of the world. Where do refugee students connect with that? Or in terms of the locations that they may be in? Because I recognise when you look at it, partly because of the immigration challenges in the UK, most of the demand, most of the challenge is actually not within the UK. We should keep domestic focus on. We've got a lot of work to do and we need to keep at it. But internationally, there's a lot to do. So how can I leverage the power of that coalition of willing across alliances, partnerships, conferences such as this, which we haven't done enough of, we would like to do more of. There are lots of people that we know in terms of people that we're connected with here and across the world, our alumni base and many, many others, and university alliances that we have, things like Universitas 21, the League of European Research Universities. These are lots of different alliances or partnerships that we can make perhaps more use of. And I look at things like transnational education. There are more students studying across the world for a UK qualification outside the UK than international students inside the UK. So where does this fit with all of that? And I don't have time to go into EdTech and the potential around some of that as well. So for me, it's on campus, it's online, and it's overseas, and it's a combination of all three. And as I look forward in the next couple of years, the challenges will remain within the UK in terms of a difficult immigration system to work with. But that's only part of this. And as we've been talking about across the last couple of days, more of that challenge exists in different parts of the world. And we need to be able to work more effectively with partners, multilateral partnerships, and through our alliances with different partners across some of the countries that have been represented across the past couple of days, who know what works in their contexts, as opposed to me trying to get on a plane with other colleagues, which we do, and go and try and import something. So there's lots there. There's a big domestic focus, too much to cover in the time that we've got today, but it's the international sense of some of what we've been doing, but we really need to scale that up. And I think that only happens through partnerships, and that's why events such as this are so vitally important. Anyway, I've gone on too long, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks again, Alan. I would really recognize the failing on our part in terms of the missing, as I said before, participation of hosting countries. Because what you're talking to is exactly what we are absolutely committed and have not been doing a good enough job in working with host institutions and host governments that are, as I said, that are bearing, the vast majority of the refugee populations, and they should be in the room, and we should be talking to them first. So just to say that is the direction that we're going. And I wanted to also reflect the title of the session today is called Humanizing Higher Education, and what Alan was talking about is exactly what we're trying to learn. Is what is the correct role of institutions? What are the responsibilities? How do universities see themselves in this world of humanitarian response, international development, sustainable development goals, etc.? So that's a huge world, and there are, every one of us has a way to interact with the SDGs. And our question is, what is the role of higher education institutions? And more importantly, how much are they willing to do? As Alan said, are they willing to, to sort of take the leap of faith and do innovative things, or put some money or some prioritization towards higher education that's inclusive and that really works towards the SDGs? So with that said, Duncan Ross is Chief Data Officer for Times Higher Education. And as he says, he's been a data miner since the 1990s, but currently is overseeing the team within Times Higher Ed that generates university rankings and related data products. And of relevance for our session today, Duncan is the lead on the I don't think they're social impact rankings, just impact rankings. So the impact rankings that Times Higher Education has developed alongside, or I don't know if you would say, Duncan, with the existing university rankings. So you can explain more about that, Duncan, but also reflecting on, why it's important that we create these incentives and these pressures and these reasons for universities to engage across the SDG goals and with refugee higher education specifically. Over to you.
No, thank you very much. I always feel nervous. Firstly, I feel nervous coming into a room outside the UK and not mentioning Brexit and apologising for that. I kind of want to ask Alan, do we still have an economy at the moment? Okay, right. Well, on the assumption that I'm sorry about Brexit and we may have an economy. Times Higher Education has been around for just over 50 years now, and we started off as part of the Times newspaper until Rupert got bored with us and kicked us out. And we've always had a role which is really to try and understand what is going on in higher education. And for much of that time, that's been around journalism. We have a team of journalists who go out there, try and understand what's happening in the world. But increasingly, we're also trying to do that through data. And one of the key issues, I think, in the world of higher education is, despite the fact, and I will come back to this, despite the fact that it's roughly 1.7% of gross world product, so it's a huge part of the global economy, it's actually pretty opaque to people outside it. It's not good at publishing data. It's certainly not good at publishing comparable data across countries. And out of that opaqueness came university rankings. And university rankings are reductive and they are all wrong. Let's start with that. All university rankings are wrong, but some university rankings are useful, to misparaphrase the great statistician, Mr. Box, or Professor Box as he was. But they are something that allow us to at least try to understand what's going on in the world of higher education. I mean, I like to describe them as they're like a football league table. Does anyone here support a football team? Two people, okay, a few more than that. Okay, so we look at the league tables, but we all recognize that the league tables don't tell us how great our teams really are. Okay? They don't capture the beauty of the play, the attacking style of football. They just run up on goals and matches won and other similar things. And league tables, ranking tables are like that. Okay? But there's another problem with ranking tables, global ranking tables in particular, which is that almost all of them are focused on the research mission of universities. Which is why if you look at our World University Rankings, or you look at QS or Shanghai Zhao Top, sorry, AWRU as it now is, or any of the global ranking tables, you will see a very familiar picture. Somewhere at the top will be Harvard, then there will be Oxford and Cambridge, Edinburgh will be just slightly further down, fractional. And that's fine. And if you went out onto the streets of Rome and asked a random tourist what the top universities in the world were, they'd come up with a list which was frankly pretty similar. But the research mission is not everything that universities are, by a long way. There are many brilliant institutions who are doing a fantastic job who will never get into the top 100 of any of those rankings. And so about 5 years ago, we started to try and understand a very different mission of universities, what we've described as the impact mission, but you might also describe it as the sustainability mission. And when we decided to do that, we decided to use the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for doing that assessment. Now, I'm a bit of a coward, and so one of the reasons I chose the SDGs is because I could have created my own framework. But then I'd be spending every single meeting having arguments with people about why my framework was right and theirs was wrong. By adopting the SDGs, it's dead easy. If you have a problem with the framework, go to one UN plaza in New York and have the argument there. Don't argue with me. So I'm a bit of a coward in that front. But more importantly, the more we dug into it, the more it became clear to us that higher education actually has a really important story to tell about the work they're already doing across all 17 of the SDGs, not just SDG 4. Sometimes people think, well, because that's got the word education in it, that's the SDG that's important in higher education. It is not. All 17 of the SDGs are critical in higher education. And higher education can do things in all of those, and does. And that's something I want to come back to. You know, this idea that higher education, just economically, is a big chunk of the world. Just economically. It has agency. And it needs to use that agency. It needs to get out there and actively push for change. You can't sit back and say, oh, we're unimportant, we don't have the power to change things. Well, you absolutely do. When Australian universities say it's not fair to measure us on low carbon energy because our grid is terrible, I say to them, why don't you argue with your electricity suppliers and tell them to produce more low carbon energy? You're paying your bills, you're major consumers. Argue with them. Now on to why the SDGs are relevant in terms of migrant communities and refugees. Well, two aspects. Firstly, of course, many of the problems that the SDGs describe are the problems that are driving migration, and they will be, and refugees in the world. Both directly in terms of climate change, and we will see that increasingly. We've seen the horrendous floods in Pakistan, we've seen the heat waves in China, and frankly everywhere. But also through secondary situations where we have conflicts that arise because of pressures put on government. Well, I say that as if it's an excuse. It's not an excuse, but pressures that go on nation states will unfortunately result in conflicts, which will in turn result in migration and refugees. So on the one hand, the issues of climate change, the issues identified in the SDGs are going to drive increased numbers of refugees around the world. And we should not, by the way, we do not have an excuse to be surprised when the next refugee crisis occurs. All too often the response of the world is, wow, I never thought this would happen again. I mean, it's crazy. We know that these things are going to happen. We just have to be better at responding to them. But on the other side, the SDGs also relate to the needs of refugee communities. SDG 10, reduced inequalities. SDG 2, no poverty. SDG 5, gender inequality. SDG 1, SDG 1 is no poverty, SDG 2 is zero hunger. How did I get that the wrong way around? But we can see this interlinking of the SDGs has real impact. And if universities can reflect on the work they're doing, then they can see how they can support refugee communities. And so as part of the impact rankings, which are based around the SDGs, we now have 1,524 universities that participated in the rankings last year. And let me show you, when we started this 4 years ago, I was sitting there, our deadline was the Friday. This won't surprise you, by the way, universities are just as bad as undergraduates when it comes to supplying data, I think, handing in their homework. So I'm sitting there thinking, are we going to have a ranking at the end of this? We've got until Friday, and on the Monday we had basically 3 universities. By the Tuesday we had 30 universities. I thought, okay, 30, that's an editorial list. We're getting in the right direction. By the Thursday we had 100. I thought, excellent, we have a ranking. In the end we had 540 universities in the first year, which was an amazing commitment. Very brave of universities, because you have no idea whether you're going to come top or whether you're going to be supporting every other university by holding them up. Now we're at 1,524 from 110 countries and regions around the world, including more countries from sub-Saharan Africa than we have in the World University Rankings, which is really positive. So the number of universities that are participating has increased, but we also want to do more to reflect the work that universities are doing with refugee students, with migrant communities. And so one of the things we are starting to do is we're starting to change questions to put a greater emphasis on refugee students. Okay, we're not introducing brand new questions just yet, because I don't want to scare universities too much. We'll get there eventually. But we're also asking them to consider, when you are answering a question, for example, about inequalities, do you have examples of where you're working with refugee communities? Because that's a really great way to demonstrate the work your university is doing. Now, we hope that this is going to provide useful data that we can actually share, that actually will give us some insight into what's going on in the world. But we also hope that this applies pressure, because my not very subtle idea here was to say, well, we know that universities pay too much attention to rankings. University vice-chancellors and presidents want to have explanations about why they've gone up or why they've gone down. If we can create a ranking that's taken seriously about the SDGs, because university presidents take these things seriously, now that data will go through the Vice-Chancellor's office. And data that goes through the Vice-Chancellor's office is strategic data, and decisions are made on it. So my not very subtle approach of changing the world is get the data, because everything is about data for me. Get the data to go through the Vice-Chancellor's office, make it important data. It's not just data that's held by someone down the road in Stirling in the environmental team. It's actually critical data for your university. And that, I hope, can start to change some of the perspectives on what universities are doing around the SDGs, absolutely, but also what they're doing for refugee students.